Tonight, we begin with a revelation that art historians had dismissed, marketing experts had overlooked, and Renaissance scholars had completely ignored. A discovery that unfolded not over decades of research, but in the careful rereading of a single letter. A single letter that rewrote everything we thought we knew about artistic genius. A single letter that exposed the most calculated self-promotion in human history. A single letter that proved Leonardo da Vinci was not just an artist, he was a marketing mastermind. What Leonardo did 500 years ago crossed a line that traditional art history had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, everything we understood about Renaissance success did not hesitate. They responded with shock, with re-evaluation, and with the uncomfortable admission that genius alone was never enough. For centuries now, there have been whispers, not from academic journals, not from museum catalogs, just whispers, that Leonardo da Vinci was preparing something far more calculated than mere inspiration. Leonardo has been called a genius. Yes, but he was strategic in his genius. His moves followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a choreography. But what set off alarm bells in the world of art scholarship this decade was that the pattern went silent. Researchers who monitor artistic legacies know the indicators. The carefully placed references in letters to nobility, the deliberate incompletion of commissioned works, the theatrical unveilings of paintings to select audiences, the sudden creation of mystery where none existed before. All of that had been hiding in plain sight. And whenever Leonardo appeared spontaneous, it meant something calculated was about to emerge. You see, we've spent 500 years celebrating Leonardo da Vinci as the ultimate Renaissance man. The painter of the Mona Lisa, the drawer of the Vitruvian Man, the inventor who dreamed of flying machines and armored tanks. But here's what nobody talks about. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just talented. He was one of the most sophisticated self-marketers in recorded history. While other artists of his era begged for commissions, Leonardo engineered desire. While his contemporaries completed dozens of paintings, Leonardo deliberately left masterpieces unfinished and became more famous for it. While Michelangelo worked himself to exhaustion, Leonardo cultivated an image of effortless brilliance that made patrons compete for his attention. This is not speculation. This is documented. And tonight, we're going to break down exactly how Leonardo da Vinci built a personal brand so powerful that it has lasted for over 5 centuries. Early in 1482, historical records detected what they described as the most audacious job application in history, including a letter to Ludovico Sforza that had not been analyzed through a marketing lens in over 500 years. These are the kinds of documents that Leonardo only created when he was signaling something very specific: his value, his indispensability, or his unique positioning in the marketplace. Historians didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Leonardo was changing his entire positioning strategy. And when a struggling artist shifts positioning without explanation, even by a small margin, we should pay attention. The letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, is a masterclass in personal branding. Leonardo was 30 years old. He was talented, yes, but so were dozens of other artists in Florence. He needed to stand out. He needed to differentiate. So what did he do? He wrote a letter listing 10 abilities, and only mentioned painting as the very last one. Read that again. The greatest painter in human history positioned himself primarily as a military engineer. He wrote about building portable bridges, about siege weapons, about armored vehicles, about techniques for destroying enemy fortifications. Only at the end did he mention, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint and sculpt. This wasn't humility. This was positioning. Leonardo understood something that most artists of his era never grasped. Patrons don't pay for art. They pay for solutions to their problems. And in 1482, Ludovico Sforza's problem wasn't a lack of beautiful paintings. It was military vulnerability. Leonardo positioned himself as the solution. The recognition issued by modern marketing scholars about this letter was not casual. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was profound. Expert after expert described Leonardo's approach as visionary, counterintuitive, and perhaps most importantly, centuries ahead of its time in understanding client psychology. But positioning only works if the target responds. Ludovico Sforza did not hesitate. In fact, his response to Leonardo was among the most generous patronages we've seen in Renaissance history. Here's what we know. Within months of receiving that letter, Ludovico welcomed Leonardo into his court. These weren't the typical commissions given to local artists. These were long-term retainer arrangements, the kind of exclusive relationships that Leonardo only secured when he was preparing to dominate an entire market. But the marketing genius didn't stop there. Leonardo understood something else that set him apart: the power of mystique. While other artists rushed to complete commissions, Leonardo deliberately slowed down. The Mona Lisa took approximately 16 years. The Last Supper was famously delayed while Leonardo wandered the streets of Milan, seemingly doing nothing. When the prior of Santa Maria del Grazie complained to Ludovico about Leonardo's slow progress, Leonardo had a response so brilliant it should be taught in every business school. He said he was searching for the perfect face of Judas, and if he couldn't find one, he might just use the prior's face instead. The complaint stopped. Tonight, historical evidence confirms that Leonardo launched a systematic personal branding campaign on every aspect of his public image, including his appearance, which had recently been transformed into what analysts believe was a deliberate visual identity. Leonardo dressed distinctively before other artists could copy him. He wore rose-colored cloaks when others wore drab browns. He grew his beard long when others kept theirs trimmed. He cultivated an appearance that was impossible to forget. In other words, Leonardo targeted visual memorability, the component that would make him instantly recognizable. This is what makes modern scholars' analysis so urgent. Leonardo's image building wasn't just personal preference. It was actionable branding. It represented the kind of strategy that could build centuries of fame if executed correctly. And Leonardo, understanding that fully, executed with precision. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. He didn't just paint what patrons requested. He didn't just complete commissions efficiently. He created mystery around every work. He generated conversation before paintings were even finished. Consider the Mona Lisa itself. Why has it remained the most famous painting in history? It's not the largest. It's not the most colorful. It's not even Leonardo's most technically impressive work. But it has something that no other painting has ever replicated: engineered mystery. That smile, that gaze, that sense that she knows something we don't. Leonardo didn't accidentally create ambiguity. He weaponized it. He understood that humans are drawn to puzzles. We obsess over things we can't fully understand. We return again and again to mysteries that resist resolution. The Mona Lisa isn't famous despite its ambiguity. It's famous because of it. Leonardo created the most talked-about painting in history by deliberately withholding certainty. And here's where the story becomes even more remarkable. Scholars now believe that Leonardo's deliberate incompletion of works was designed to test the loyalty of patrons after years of artistic oversupply. Leonardo wanted to see whether patrons would wait indefinitely for genius. And instead of abandoning him, the opposite happened. Patrons didn't leave for faster artists. They competed for Leonardo's attention with such intensity, such desperation, that even rival courts noticed. You don't get a pope's attention easily. But Leonardo did. Art historians speaking with researchers under anonymity describe Leonardo's strategy as manufactured scarcity, a way to increase perceived value by limiting supply. But Leonardo proved throughout his career that he remained both brilliant and strategic. His incomplete works were not only beautiful, They were positioned so precisely that patrons viewed waiting as a privilege. That psychology matters because it shows Leonardo understood demand creation. It shows that Leonardo was not passively waiting for recognition. He was actively engineering it. Consider his famous notebooks. Leonardo wrote over 13,000 pages of observations, inventions, and sketches. But he wrote them backward, in mirror script that could only be read with a mirror. Why? Some historians argue it was simply because Leonardo was left-handed. But marketing analysts see something else entirely. Built-in mystique. Leonardo knew those notebooks would survive him. He knew future generations would pore over them. And he made absolutely certain they would be difficult to decipher. Easy answers don't create legends. Puzzles do. As research continued emerging throughout the last decade, we learn more about the scale of Leonardo's personal branding. His theatrical presentations of inventions forced patrons to experience his genius rather than merely hear about it. His strategic relationships with multiple competing courts that had been cultivated simultaneously created bidding wars for his services. His apprentice network, operating throughout Italy, reportedly spread stories and legends used by Leonardo to build his reputation in markets he'd never even visited. This wasn't just artistic talent. This wasn't just Renaissance networking. This was systematic brand architecture. This was reputation engineering. And reputation engineering is the one thing Leonardo's contemporaries struggled to replicate throughout their careers. For every masterpiece Michelangelo created, Leonardo countered with something that generated more conversation. For every ceiling Raphael painted, Leonardo countered with rumors about inventions that seemed impossible. Leonardo didn't compete on output. He competed on mindshare. Remember, Michelangelo thought working harder would secure his legacy. He thought completing more commissions would prove his worth. He thought exhaustion was the price of immortality. But tonight, the exact opposite is evident. Leonardo completed fewer than 20 paintings in his entire lifetime. Leonardo deliberately left his most famous works unfinished. Leonardo is more famous today than any artist who outworked him. The lesson is uncomfortable, but undeniable. Perception often matters more than production. Leonardo understood this 500 years before personal branding became an industry. What makes this analysis so revealing and so uncomfortable is that Leonardo's marketing genius emerged at a time when he was under genuine pressure. The Florentine art market wanted traditional commissions. The church wanted religious devotion visible in every brushstroke. Wealthy patrons wanted flattering portraits delivered on schedule. Rival artists wanted Leonardo to fail so they could take his place. Leonardo was balancing these demands while simultaneously reinventing what it meant to be an artist. And when artists in that position make unusual moves, they're not doing it from comfort. They're doing it from necessity. They're doing it from survival instinct. Leonardo wasn't born wealthy. He was the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman. He had no family connections to leverage. He had no inherited wealth to fall back on. Everything he achieved, he engineered. And he engineered it brilliantly. The recognition now spreading through academic institutions was designed to signal that scholarship is no longer willing to separate artistic genius from strategic genius. Researchers have said plainly that Leonardo's approach was inconsistent with the myth of pure inspiration. That is academic language for, we've been telling the wrong story for 500 years. You don't usually hear that admission from art historians unless something fundamental is at stake. And something fundamental is at stake here. The way we teach creativity, the way we celebrate genius, the way we pretend that marketing is somehow beneath true artists. Leonardo proves that the greatest artist in history was also the greatest marketer of his era. And there's nothing shameful about that. There's only truth. Meanwhile, modern marketing experts have addressed business audiences in direct, unmistakable language about Leonardo's relevance. They say, Leonardo understood that talent without visibility is worthless. They say he manufactured mystery the way modern companies manufacture products. And they say his personal brand has generated billions in tourism revenue for institutions that display his work. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from an industry that understands just how much money visibility is worth. The Louvre receives approximately 10 million visitors annually. Most of them come specifically for the Mona Lisa, one painting, created by one man, who understood that legacy is built, not born. Here's what makes Leonardo's strategy even more impressive. His marketing genius wasn't isolated to his artwork. Along with his visual art positioning, his engineering proposals also contained deliberate mysteries designed to intrigue patrons. His scientific observations were presented theatrically to maximize wonder. His anatomical studies increased his aura of forbidden knowledge. All of this happened within the same carefully managed career. When Leonardo positioned multiple aspects of his identity simultaneously, it meant something larger was underway. He wasn't building a career. He was building a mythology. Scholars are now considering several interpretations. One is that Leonardo consciously studied the reputations of previous masters and reverse-engineered their fame. Another is that Leonardo intuitively understood human psychology better than anyone of his era. A third possibility, the one fascinating researchers the most, is that Leonardo explicitly designed his career as a 500-year brand strategy. But today, the evidence supports all three. He didn't just paint masterpieces. He didn't just invent remarkable machines. He didn't just document the natural world. He constructed an identity so compelling that we still can't look away. What we're examining now is a test of creativity versus strategy. Traditional art history wants to preserve the myth of pure genius. Marketing analysis wants to demonstrate that genius is never pure. Cultural critics want to prevent the commercialization of art history. And business schools want to extract actionable lessons from historical figures. Leonardo stands at the intersection of all these tensions, and he wins every argument. Tonight, we've learned from researchers who are now re-examining every aspect of Leonardo's career. They say his unfinished works weren't failures, they were strategic decisions. They say his theatrical personality wasn't ego, it was brand differentiation. And they say Leonardo's decision to position himself as more than an artist is likely part of a broader legacy strategy intended to achieve immortality. But Leonardo's reputation is not diminishing. In fact, Leonardo's reputation is growing. Modern understanding, nuanced, strategic, and honest, sends a message to creative professionals that marketing is not the enemy of art. And it sends a message to marketers that the greatest campaigns are built on genuine substance. As scholarship continues, we expect more details to emerge about exactly what Leonardo hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that his strategy was timeless. It taught us that positioning matters as much as talent. It taught us that mystery creates more engagement than clarity. And it taught us that legacy requires architecture, not accident. What happens next will depend on what modern creators do with this knowledge. If they dismiss it as irrelevant to real art, this lesson will be remembered as another missed opportunity. If they embrace strategic thinking alongside creative excellence, Leonardo's example has already shown them the path. They have shown us what's possible. They have shown us what genius really requires. And tonight, for the first time in centuries, Leonardo da Vinci appears to be fully understood. The myth is quiet, too quiet. And when myth goes quiet, it means truth is emerging. It means we're finally seeing the complete picture. Because tonight, we learn something Leonardo knew all along. That genius without strategy is forgotten. That talent without visibility dies in obscurity. And that the greatest artists are always, secretly, marketers. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Leonardo da Vinci was the greatest artist of his age. He was the greatest marketer of his age. And those two facts are not contradictions. They are the same achievement. And we will be here, studying every detail, as the next generation of creators learns from the original master.